Hola, ¿qué tal? In this video we're going to revise Unit 8, los desafíos de la inmigración y de la integración en España. Too long. Here we go. As usual, we will revise the topic, grammar, and some vocabulary. When it comes to the topics, we will look at immigration's effect on local schools, the difficulty for immigrants renting homes, and the social exclusion of immigrants. For grammar, we will cover stem-changing verbs, spell-changing verbs, expressions of time, and surprise, surprise, more uses of the subjunctive. Of course, we will finish with some vocabulary. When we talk about radical changes and orthographic changes, it means two different things that happen to some verbs when they are conjugated. I'll break them down clearly. A radical change means the stem of the verb changes. Orthographic changes happen to preserve pronunciation when endings are added. The sound stays the same, but the spelling changes. These usually appear in yo forms or in the preterite. I will remind you, in Spanish there are two types of irregular verbs, the stem-changing verbs and those that are irregular but only in the first person. Let's look at the stem-changing verbs in first place. We have three groups. The group where the stem O becomes UE when conjugated, for example, poder, it would become yo puedo. The second group where E becomes IE, perder, pierdo, and the third group where E becomes I. For example, pedir, I ask, would be pido. When conjugating, you need to change all the stems except for nosotros and vosotros. It would be yo puedo, tú puedes, él o ella puede, nosotros podemos, vosotros podéis, I don't change it, ellos pueden. Briefly, we have the type of irregular verbs only in the first person. For example, saber, yo sé, conocer, yo conozco, hacer, yo hago, tener, yo tengo. And finally, I had to add the verb here because it's the king of irregular verbs. If you're still unsure about these verbs, I'll leave a link to a grammar video where I explain them in more detail with extra examples. Orthographic changes, in layman's terms, spelling changes, happen to preserve pronunciation when endings are added. The sound stays the same, but the spelling changes. They usually appear in yo forms or in the preterite. C becomes ki-u. To keep the ha-ki sound before an E, we swap the C, so buscar becomes busqué. G becomes gu. Same logic here. To keep that g hard, we add a little u. Llegar becomes llegué. Z becomes C. This is just the Spanish spelling rule. Z can be next to E. So for empezar, we write empecé. G becomes J. Now with escoger, you only need that J in the present tense, escojo. Okay, let's tackle the next thing. Expressions of time. Beyond just basic clock time, the Edexcel A-Level Spanish specification requires you to master 5 distinct categories of temporal expressions to handle complex translations and timeline sequencing. So we will speak about ongoing actions, interrupted or ongoing past actions, time elapsed since an action, future time clauses, and prepositional phrases of a relative time. I will quickly break them down. Ongoing actions, in layman's terms, I have been doing something. These structures are used for actions that started in the past but are still happening right now. This is a major trap in translation exams because English uses the perfect tense, but in Spanish you have two options. You can translate it literally, for example, he estado haciendo algo, literally, or in the present tense but using these formulas. Desde hace plus time period, used with a duration of time. For example, muchos inmigrantes viven en charbolas Desde hace varios meses, many immigrants have been living in shantytowns for several months. Of course, you can translate it literally, but it sounds more natural if in present tense. Desde plus a specific date or point used within a specific starting point. For example, la ley de extranjería regula el flujo migratorio desde 2000. The immigration law has been regulating the migratory flow since 2000. Again, you have the literal options. And finally, a highly idiomatic alternative favored by Edexcel examiners for top marks. Llevar plus time period plus gerund. For example, España lleva décadas sufriendo la llegada de cayucos a las costas Canarias. Spain has been suffering the arrival of boats to the Canary coasts for decades. Interrupted or ongoing past actions. These structures describe an action that had been going on in the past before something else interrupted it or changed. It requires the imperfect tense. So the formula is hacía plus time period plus, don't forget que, plus imperfect verb. For example, hacía 2 años que los trabajadores sin papeles solicitaban el arraigo cuando la ley cambió. Another formula is desde hacía plus time period. For example, el país no experimentaba una ola migratoria tan intensa desde hacía una década. Or you can put it at the beginning of the sentence. Desde hacía una década, el país no experimentaba una ola migratoria tan intensa. Time elapsed since an action. In plain English, the go rules. Used to state how long ago a completed action took place. This requires past tense, usually the preterite. So the formula is hace and time period. And you can place it either before or at the end of the sentence. For example, el Parlamento aprobó la regularización extraordinaria hace 20 minutos. O hace 20 minutos que el Parlamento aprobó la regularización extraordinaria. It's easy. It's hace plus the time period. Future time clauses. This is a critical A-level grammar rule. When a time expression refers to an anticipated future event, the verb that follows it must go into the present subjunctive. Why? Because we don't know if it's going to happen or not. In other words, we are facing uncertainty. So the expressions cuando, en cuanto o tan pronto como, hasta que triggers the subjunctive as long as they are referring to the future. For example, cuando el gobierno cambie la política migratoria, habrá menos problemas. We don't know. O tan pronto como obtengan el permiso de residencia, podrán trabajar. Or not. We don't know. Uncertainty. O hasta que mejoren las condiciones de vida, muchos seguirán emigrando. Or not. We don't know. However, if it's a routine or a fact, we use the indicative. But I won't explain this here. If you want to know more about indicative versus subjunctive, I will leave you a link in the description box. Prepositional phrases of relative time. Essentially, advanced connector used to establish timelines across essays and listening tracks. I am going to warn you now and at the end of this explanation. All the expressions we are about to revise are formed with ing in English, but, and it's a huge but, in Spanish are in infinitive. Al plus infinitive means upon doing or on doing something. For example, al llegar a las costas españolas, los refugiados reciben ayuda humanitaria de la Cruz Roja. On arriving at the Spanish coast, refugees receive humanitarian aid from the Red Cross. Antes de or después de plus infinitive, shifting a timeline relative to an action. Antes de solicitar la nacionalidad española, deben aprobar un examen. Después de aprobar el examen pueden solicitar la nacionalidad española infinitive, infinitive, infinitive. Apunto D plus infinitive is when you are about to do something, on the verge of something. For example, el gobierno está a punto de aprobar la nueva ley de inmigración. I will repeat this for those in the back. On doing something, before or after doing something, in English use ing, but in Spanish are followed by infinitive. One last thing. When translating for in a time context, don't just blindly use por or para. If you mean for a duration of time in the past that is now finished, use durante or nothing at all. For example, la comunidad marroquí fue la más numerosa en España durante un año entero. O la comunidad marroquí fue la más numerosa en España un año entero. Nothing. The Moroccan community was the most numerous in Spain for a whole year. So, can we use por? Well, yes, but it sounds more Latin American or even English and less natural Spanish from Spain. Let's dive into some more advanced uses of the subjunctive. Again, there are 5 advanced categories under this specific topic. The unknown or non-existent antecedent, concessive clauses, no matter how, no matter what formulations, expressions of choice or concession, and conditional desires. Sometimes, in sentences with que, the choice between the subjunctive and indicative depends on whether you're expressing a fact or uncertainty. Let's see this with an example. If I say, busco una ONG que ayuda, indicative, a los refugiados, I am looking for the NGO that helps refugees, I know it exists. It's a specific organization. This is a known fact. However, if I say busco una ONG que ayude a los refugiados, I'm not translating because it's the same sentence in English, any NGO that might help refugees is unknown or hypothetical. I need to use the subjunctive. And don't forget the negative antecedent, non-existence. For example, no hay nadie, this because it's negative triggers the subjunctive, que tenga una solución perfecta para la inmigración. Tenga, there is no one, subjunctive, who has a perfect solution to immigration. While the conjunction aunque is common, its mood changes entirely depending on the certainty of your argument. So use indicative if the fact is true, known, or acknowledged by the speaker. For example, aunque muchos inmigrantes contribuyen a la economía, siguen existiendo perjuicios. Even though many immigrants contribute to the economy, and they do, prejudice still exists. Use subjunctive if the fact is hypothetical, unknown, or if you want to dismiss the importance of the obstacle. It would be like even if. For example, aunque el gobierno aumente las ayudas, algunos problemas continuarán. Even if the government increases support, I don't know if it will, some problems will continue. Edexcel examiners look out for these advanced structures in Paper 1 and Paper 2 translation tasks because they showcase native level syntax. Por más que o por mucho que, plus absolutely. Subjunctive means no matter how much. For example, por mucho que el gobierno intente mejorar la integración, siempre habrá desafíos. No matter how much the government tries to improve the integrations, blah, 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 blah. Or another expression would be formed by por plus active of a verb plus que, plus subjunctive, of course. For example, por difícil que sea la convivencia multicultural, ofrece muchas ventajas. In English, no matter how difficult multicultural coexistence may be, blah, 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 blah. Okay, and watch this. Duplicated verbs, okay? This, if you have the chance, use them because it's like, whoa, okay? For example, digan lo que digan, sea lo que sea, hagan lo que hagan. Digan lo que digan, la inmigración enriquece la cultura española. Whatever people say, immigration enriches Spanish culture. O sea como sea, hay que encontrar soluciones justas. Be that as it may, fair solutions must be found. When combined with the relative words to mean ever, wherever, whichever, whoever, the following verb is pushed into the subjunctive because the outcome is undetermined. In Spanish, these are formed by combining donde, quién, cómo, cuándo, for example, with quiera. Also, remember that whatever translates to cualquiera. All of these expressions are followed by que and a verb in the subjunctive mood. For example, cualquiera que sea el país de origen, todos merecen las mismas oportunidades, whatever the country of origin may be. O donde quiera que vivan, los inmigrantes deben sentirse seguros, wherever they live. Or finally, quien quiera que llegue a España debe respetar las leyes del país, whoever comes to Spain. To wrap up the grammar session, let's look at the as long as group. When setting a strict condition that must be met for something else to happen, you must bypass see, if, and use these subjunctive triggering conjunctions. Con tal de que, a condición de que, o siempre y cuando. So as long as, provided that, on condition that. For example, la integración mejorará con tal de que la sociedad acepte la diversidad cultural. Integration will improve as long as society accepts cultural diversity. Or it could be a condición de que, on condition, o siempre que, o siempre y cuando la sociedad acepte. So any, they are interchangeable. There are other similar expressions, but these are the ones most commonly used at A-level. If you'd like to learn more about any of the grammar topics we've covered today, I will leave a link in the description below. Now, let's move on to the main topics. Let's begin with the immigration's effect on local schools. Specifically with the growth and proportion of immigrant pupils. Right now, there is a record number of immigrant pupils in Spanish classrooms, accounting for almost 20% of all the students. According to the Ministry of Education, the number of foreign pupils has increased by over 427,000 over the past 10 years alone. Another significant trend is the sharp rise in the proportion of Hispanic American students over the last decade. Let's take a quick look at the main regions of origin. First, South and Central America. These regions account for 38.4% of all foreign students. Next is Europe, which remains the second largest region of origin at 28.4%. And finally, Africa. Africa has lost its historic dominance and has fallen to third place, now accounting for 22.9% of foreign pupils. Next, let's examine the characteristics of their schooling. Most immigrant children are enrolled in school, especially during compulsory stages such as primary and secondary education. But is there segregation by origin in Spanish classrooms? Oh, without a doubt. To understand this issue more clearly, we can consider both a European and national perspective. At the European level, Spain ranks behind only the UK, Belgium, and Austria in terms of segregation by origin. It actually shows higher levels of migrant pupil segregation than countries with longer history of receiving immigration, such as Germany and Denmark. Turning to the national picture within Spain, Madrid, the Basque Country and Catalonia are the regions with the highest levels of immigrant pupil segregation. These areas stand out for maintaining patterns in which native and foreign students end up attending largely separate schools. Also, we need to talk about the main educational difficulties these students face. We can break this down into four key areas. First, we have language barriers. Many pupils arrive without knowing enough Spanish, which makes early learning much more difficult for them. Second is the academic gap. On average, immigrant pupils are often behind their expected level by more than 1 year. This leads directly to our third point, lower academic performance. We see much higher rates of repeating school years here. In fact, it's around 50% among immigrant pupils compared to just 22% for native pupils. And fourth, there is the issue of early school leaving. The dropout rate among young people of foreign origin exceeds 30%, which is more than double the rate of Spanish-born students. This brings us to the structural challenges within the educational system itself, which can be broken down into three major issues. First, as I have mentioned before, there is school segregation. When immigrant pupils are heavily concentrated in just certain schools, overall performance drops once it passes a specific threshold. This happens because many students are still learning the language or starting with lower academic levels, which naturally slows down the overall classroom pace. Another critical problem is the lack of resources. Schools with high concentrations of immigrant students desperately need extra language support, specialized staff, and social services. If the funding and resources don't keep up with these needs, the educational outcomes inevitably suffer. Finally, there are insufficient or uneven policies. Integration efforts often fall short because responsibilities are split across different levels of government. Because of this limited coordination, we see uneven implementation and massive disparities in funding, which leads to highly unequal integration outcomes depending on the region. Despite of all these difficulties, it is important to highlight the positive aspects as well. First and foremost, schools remain the primary space for social and cultural integration. We are also seeing a great trend with second-generation pupils, those born right in Spain. They consistently tend to achieve much better educational outcomes than first-generation pupils who arrived later in childhood. Ultimately, this cultural diversity enriches both the classroom learning experience and daily social coexistence for everyone. Now, let's address a frequently discussed topic in the media, unaccompanied migrant minors, often referred to in Spain by the acronym MENAS. This term simply describes a specific legal category, children under 18 who arrive without a parent or legal guardian. Moving on to the statistics, exactly how many minors are we talking about? The Ministry of Inclusion, Social Security and Migration has recorded around 21,100 individuals, mostly Africans. Driven by broader migration trends, these numbers have surged by over 200% in roughly an 8-year span. Demographically, official data shows a massive gender disparity. Males account for roughly 94% of these minors, while girls represent just about 6%. Managing this situation presents deep structural and social challenges. We can break the principal issues down into four major areas. First, there is an overcrowding of the reception system. Arrival hotspots like the Canary Islands face a chronic strain of their youth facilities, which forces frequent transfers to mainland Spain and generates political friction over shared responsibility. Next comes the issue of public safety and stigmatization. Incidents in specific neighborhoods have fueled local worries, which social organizations warn can feed xenophobic narratives, while resident groups continue to call for additional security and oversight around local reception centers. Another critical problem is the lack of opportunities upon reaching adulthood. When they turn 18, many young people must leave the protection system entirely. The extreme difficulties in obtaining residence permits and a lack of employment support can, in some cases, push them straight towards marginalization. Finally, these minors are extremely vulnerable, facing trauma from migration, weak institutional protection, and a high risk of exploitation when separated from their families. Let's learn about the difficulties for immigrants renting homes. The reality is that finding accommodation in Spain has become increasingly difficult, not only for immigrants but also for many Spanish citizens. However, immigrants can face some additional unique challenges depending on things like their legal status, their employment situation, and exactly where they are looking to live. Shifting focus to the specifics, let's break down the main issues. To start, we have a severe housing shortage and skyrocketing rental prices. Right now, Spain is in the middle of a massive housing affordability crisis. In many parts of the country, there simply aren't enough rental properties available on the market, while the demand from tenants just keeps growing. This combination of low supply and high competition is driving prices up rapidly, making it one of the biggest roadblocks to finding a place to live. This is particularly noticeable in major cities such as Madrid, Barcelona, Valencia, and Palma, where the rents have risen significantly over recent years. The issue has become so serious that the European Commission has warned that high housing costs are affecting workers' ability to move around the country and are creating wider economic and social inequalities. Another critical barrier is discrimination in the rental market. While the housing shortage affects everyone across the board, some immigrants face additional obstacles purely because of their nationality or ethnic background. In fact, extensive research carried out by organizations like Provivienda has uncovered widespread evidence of direct discrimination within the housing sector, making it significantly harder for foreign residents to secure a lease. Some landlords and estate agents have been reported to reject applicants based on their country of origin, particularly non-European Union nationals, even when they meet the financial requirements. This means that for some immigrants, finding a home can take longer and involve more setbacks than it does for local residents. Another major obstacle is the financial documentation that many landlords now require. In order to secure a rental property, tenants are often expected to provide a permanent employment contract, several recent pay slips, a bank guarantee or additional financial security, several months' rent pay in advance. For immigrants who have only recently arrived in Spain or who are working on temporary contracts, meeting these requirements can be extremely difficult. Even people with steady incomes can sometimes struggle if they cannot provide the specific paperwork requested by landlords or letting agencies. The situation is often even more difficult for immigrants who don't have legal residency or work permits. Without legal documentation, it can be very hard to prove a stable income or enter into formal rental agreements. As a result, many undocumented migrants are at greater risk of housing insecurity overcrowded living conditions, or exclusion from the mainstream rental market altogether. Several social organizations working in Spain have highlighted this group as being among the most vulnerable when it comes to access to housing. Are there any positive developments? Well, despite these challenges, there are also some positive points worth mentioning. Immigrants who have legal residency, stable employment, and the necessary documentation are generally able to rent accommodation in Spain. In addition, a number of organizations offer support and guidance to people struggling to find housing, such as Caritas, Spanish Commission for Refugee Aid, and Provivienda, as well as various local and regional government programs. Another important point is that conditions can be very different depending on location. While major cities remain highly competitive and expensive, medium-sized towns and rural areas often offer more affordable housing and wider range of options. To sum up, the biggest challenge facing immigrants seeking housing in Spain is the combination of rising rents, a shortage of available properties, and increasingly strict financial requirements imposed by landlords. Let's move on to the last part. The social exclusion of immigrants. Immigrants in Spain face marginalization and alienation shaped by the labor market, government systems, and housing issues. A report by Caritas reveals that 47.4% of the immigrant population in Spain is in a situation of social exclusion, compared to 15.3% of the native population. Many migrants work in a few essential but unstable sectors like hospitality, construction, agriculture, and care work. Another major barrier is what is often described as the glass ceiling of qualifications recognition. Highly qualified migrants often face underemployment due to long delays in recognizing foreign qualifications. Migrant women are especially affected, with high rates of temporary work, low income, and limited legal protection, often working in the informal economy. According to Caritas Española, migrant women face high insecurity, with 84% in temporary jobs and 73% earning low incomes, many working informally without full access to benefits or legal protections. Immigrants often lose family and community support when they move, leading to rising loneliness and social exclusion. At the same time, hostile public attitudes have increased due to misinformation and political polarization. Although the latest reform of the immigration regulations has made family reunification easier, significant barriers still remain, like financial stability and adequate housing. Also, institutional exclusion affects groups unevenly based on nationality. For example, people of Latin American origin benefit from historical pathway and are able to apply for citizenship after 2 years, while others, such as African, Chinese, British, or Indian citizens, typically must wait 10 years. Undocumented migrants face long-term job insecurity and barriers to integration, but Spain's agrarian systems provides a pathway for non-EU residents without legal status to regularize their situation and gain temporary residency. We will learn about the arraigo system in a minute, but first it is necessary to clarify an important point. So let's clear up this misconception, because several of my students have already told me that in 2026 Spain is legalizing 500,000 illegal immigrants just like that, with no requirements or conditions. That's simply not true. What the Spanish government has done is approve an extraordinary regularization process that could allow approximately 500,000 immigrants and asylum seekers to regularize their migration status, but approval is not automatic for everyone. But we were talking about el arraigo. So, applicants must meet specific requirements depending on the type of arraigo they qualify for. There are 5 different types of arraigo. Social arraigo. This requires a person to have lived in Spain for at least 2 years, to have a job contract, and to prove their social integration through family ties or an official integration report. Employment arraigo. This is aimed at people who have been living in Spain for at least 2 years and can prove they have had an employment relationship lasting at least 6 months. Family arraigo. This applies to close family members of Spanish citizens, such as children or parents of Spanish minors, as well as children whose mother or father was originally Spanish. There is not a minimum previous residency requirement for this category. Socio-educational arraigo. This allows people who have lived in Spain for at least 2 years to regularize their status if they commit to undertaking official studies or recognize vocational training while they remain in the country. Second chance arraigo. This is designed for people who previously held a residence permit in Spain in recent years and wish to recover their legal status. For any of these categories of arraigo, applicants must also meet the following general requirements. They must not have a criminal record either in Spain or in any country where they have lived during the previous 5 years. They must not be subject to an entry ban or be listed as inadmissible within the Schengen area. They must not be an applicant for international protection, including asylum, at the time of submitting the application. Successfully applying through any of these routes grants the person a residence and work permit with an initial validity period of 1 year. Arduous migratory journeys such as the Atlantic route by small boat to the Canary Islands and the subsequent struggle for legal survival on the mainland trigger severe conditions of chronic stress, depression, and anxiety. Children of immigrants born or raised in Spain suffer deep cultural alienation. Although they feel Spanish, daily social barriers and prejudice constantly remind them of their foreign origin, leaving them in a painful identity limbo. Okay, with the grammar and topics out of the way, let's finish with the vocabulary. I am going to repeat what I say in every unit. The vocabulary I'm showing you here is the essential stuff, the absolutely minimum you need to know. But remember, the more you learn, the better. Okay, even so, I want to emphasize that in this unit it's essential you learn some terms related to renting, such as el arrendador, the landlord or landlady, la fianza, the deposit, and el inquilino, the tenant. Remember that sin papeles can function as both, as a noun and an adjective. And be careful with the word acoso, harassment. In this unit, it appears as acoso sexual, sexual harassment. But remember that just like in English, it can also refer to acoso laboral, workplace harassment, acoso escolar, school bullying, or ciberacoso, and so on. I absolutely had to add a couple of terms such as el arraigo and mena, because although they are not in your book, they are words you may need if you expand your knowledge beyond the textbook. Also important are the expressions correr el riesgo, dar fe, and pasar desapercibido. Watch the conjugation of huir. So you can see it's irregular. And I will repeat this for those in the back. Molesto has nothing to do with molested in English. Remember that it means annoying or bothersome when used with the verb ser, and bothered or annoyed when used with estar. However, discriminado does not change its meaning whether it's used with ser or estar. And that is us done for today. If you found this video helpful, sometimes I wonder if I'm just talking to myself here, please hit the like button and subscribe. Nos vemos en el próximo video. Venga, hasta luego.